日本は学校のある日は制服を着るじゃないですか。That sentence is short but can be vicious. Once again, it's a good sentence to understand that wa doesn't indicate a subject. Here you have to wa because the speaker wants to emphasize two things. They might be a bit confusing, so you can translate them by as for or concerning. We then have something like concerning Japan, as for school days, we wear uniforms. You thus have to guess a subject, which here is impersonal. It's like a general truth. Remember what wa indicates. It indicates that you're talking about something and that you're going to add some information about it. Here, the theme is Japan, and you are indeed stating a fact about Japan. The wa on 学校のある日 emphasizes that it's on school days and not another time. It's implied that you don't wear the uniform on weekends, for example. It is the contrast effect. You have a similar contrast effect on Japan. The speaker specifies that he talks about Japan and not another country. Anyway, in English, we'll just say, in Japan, on school days, we wear the uniform. And so, yes, be careful, because a group with wa can be translated in many ways. For, in, on, etc., etc. And then you have the janai desu ka expression, which here is the third use we've studied. The listener knows this fact, but the speaker wants to remind him. He needs to state this fact before saying what he wants to say. So in English, right would be enough. So in Japan, on school days, we wear the uniform, right? 外国人に聞いたら、日本の制服かっこいいってよく言ってます。In that sentence, you have three clauses. The one with tara, the quote, and the speech verb. So the quote obviously works with the speech verb, which divides the sentence into two parts. You can translate the first part with tara right away. But the problem of tara is that sometimes you can translate it by if, and sometimes by when. You then have to see what the best option is. So we'll see with the rest of the sentence. So for the moment, we have if you ask foreigners or when you ask foreigners. And yes, once again, you have to guess the subject. It's obvious, but we tend to forget it. In Japanese, 90% of the sentences don't have a subject. So you have to guess it all the time. Then, second part of the sentence. Even if you don't really know the grammar behind it, you see that you must probably have a strictly embedded clause here. It works just like to omou and its quote. Therefore, you have to invert these two clauses. First, the main clause, the speech verb, then the quote. You then have, they often say, Japanese uniforms are so cool. Okay, and so we have our sentence. When you ask foreigners, they often say, Japanese uniforms are so cool. We all agree, I think, that when works better than if here. でも、実は辞めたいと思ってる日本人がいるんです。So here, complicated sentence, so be thorough. First, you underline the verbs. And you should spot something right away. If you don't spot it right away, it means that you're not used to it yet, but you should. You have a verb stuck in front of a noun. You then have a relative. If you miss this information, then you're done. So take the habit to check if you have a verb in front of a noun. But the problem with relatives is that we don't know where they begin. But you know that a quote has to be linked to its speech verb. You have the to in Japanese that indicates it. The two clauses are linked, therefore they work together. Once again, the strictly embedded clause rule explains it anyway. If it's strictly embedded, you can't separate them. And anyway, if you've listened to the extract we've studied many times, you might be used to hear tai to omoimasu. And you should feel that it works together and that it's an expression in itself. Like, it shouldn't even bother you. Your relative is then this whole part. And so your subject is this whole non-group. But actually, the sentence is very simple because, you see, it's just a X ga iru sentence. And that's it. And by the way, when you have a relative that is confusing you, you can try to first translate the sentence without it to spot the core sentence. We then have here Nihonjin ga iru, so there are Japanese people. And then you know that you have a precision on Japanese people, so you add it. Remember that anyway, when you have a relative, you have to translate the head noun first and then the relative. So there are Japanese people, omotteru, who think, yametai to, that they want to stop. But you know anyway that tai to omou, you can translate it by would like. So there are Japanese people who'd like to stop. And by the way, don't be confused by the teiru form. You see, you have omotteru. The E is omitted because we are in speech. So it should be omotteru, but you drop the E. So omotteru. So it's a teiru form. But the teiru form is used a lot. And when I say a lot, it's a whole lot. So in most cases, it won't even change the translation. So for the moment, just get used to see many teiru form and kind of ignore them actually. But if you want to know why there is a teiru form here, it's because it's currently happening and lasting in time. We've seen that the teiru tense was a progressive tense. So this teiru just emphasizes the fact that they are thinking this. Like nowadays, you see, and that's it. Now I recommend that you press pause and that you read the relative plus its head noun a few times until you feel that this is what it means, that this is how you should translate it, you see? Try to feel that this first part is just bringing a precision on Japanese people, just like an adjective. And finally, you have the des to give an explanatory feel to all of this. 苦しいよ. So that sentence is easy. You just have to guess the correct subject. It is painful. It being the uniform. And once again, you see that you don't have da after an adjective. And finally, 暑いので. So we've talked about it, that you could have a no de clause used alone in speech. In written language, it should be 暑いので苦しい. But in speech, since you think while speaking, you might add the reason after having stated your fact. So we all do it in our languages too. Then you can translate by because it's hot. Anyway, it won't change anything in your translation. You know that the node will be translated by because or since, etc., etc., and that you have to place it at the beginning of the clause in English. Remember that node indicates that what's before is the reason. But in English, to indicate that something is a reason, we add because at the beginning, before the reason. This is why it's inverted. フランスの方が確かに自由で、先生もあまり厳しくないですけど、制服の方がいい場合もあると思います。So that sentence might be the most difficult one of all the exercises. So let's go clause after clause. First clause is marked by de. So, des in te form. You then know that you will have to connect it to the next clause by and without inverting anything. Then you spot the expression nohoga. Here it was a bit tricky because the adjective that works with it is jiyu. You have tashikani in the middle, but it's just an adverb. So if it bothers you, delete it for the moment. So once again, no hoga indicates the winner of a comparison. You then have France is more free. And then you can add the meaning of tashikani. France is certainly more free. And the te form. And so I'll say it once again just in case. De is des. This is why you have is in English. It cannot be the de particle because it's after an adjective here. Then you have a clause with kedo, so you don't need to invert anything either. By the way, I forgot to mention it, but amari plus negation means not much, not very. You then have teachers are not very strict either, but... And then the last part. It ends with to omoimasu, so be sure to put it at the beginning. I think that. And then what's before to is what you think. So here, if you make your noun groups, you see that you just have one. You can't separate an adjective from its noun. And you know that seifuku no hogai works together because it's an expression. So don't get baited by the ga particle. If you rush, you might think that you have two noun groups. But the grammatical expressions we learn can never be separated. So see them as a whole. You see no hoga, you know that it works together. You can't separate them. So actually, this bit works just like a relative. And you have to remember one rule. In Japanese, every precision added on a noun has to be before the noun, never after. But in English, sometimes you add the precisions before the noun and sometimes after the noun. You then have to see how you can make it work. So if you're very confused, you can first translate seifuku no hoga I to kind of understand what's inside your relative, you see? So it means uniforms are better. And you know that this is a precision on by, which means situations, cases. You then have a little clause, a little relative. And you know that we always translate the head noun first. It then means situations where uniforms are better. This whole thing is then, as you can see, the subject of the verb aru. So, I think that there are situations where uniforms are better. This sentence was horrible. I know, it's just for people who are not 100% beginners. So don't worry if you're completely lost with the sentence, it's fine, honestly, it was difficult. And so, for people who are interested in deepening the way clauses connect to each other, here is the pattern of the sentence. So you can skip to the next sentence if you want, because it might be confusing. So you have two and it clauses and two SE clauses. But the two and it clauses are closely linked together. So we can place them in the same bag. You see, with the meaning of the sentence that these two and it clauses kind of work together, even if they are not embedded together. So you kind of have a little slash after the te form and a big slash after kedo. So it's not because clauses are not embedded that they are completely unrelated. It's kind of a Russian doll system, actually. In the long and complex sentences, clauses form big bags, and inside of these bags, you can have several clauses that will be embedded or not. In last video, I told you to focus on the inversions. Well, what I'm explaining now will be the next level once you've mastered the inversions. But we won't get to it before a while, I think. I'm just explaining this for people who are like curious and more advanced. それに、礼儀を大事にしていますね. That sentence is pretty easy, but the literal translation might be weird. You have the X or Y ni suru pattern, so to make X, Y. So literally, they make good manners precious. So this is an expression in itself, which means to take good care of, to treasure something. Remember it because you'll see all the time. それに, besides, they treasure good manners. You might have noticed that the teiru tense is used here. Once again, it's because it lasts in time. So here it's not exactly that they're doing an action right now. It's rather the current state of affairs, the way things are. Just like when you say that you live somewhere, or that you work in that company, or that you study language. But once again, you see that it does not impact your translation, so just ignore it. You don't really care for the moment, honestly. それも悪くないと思います. And so last one, that probably looks super easy after the monsters we translated. So no analysis for this one. If you don't remember your translation by heart, try to translate it in one go, now, without thinking. So you should have, I think that this isn't bad either. So of course the mo particle can be translated by either in negative sentences. If you didn't manage to translate it in one go, then you need to train more. And that's it. So I've set aside the second slide because it's a nasty one with the biggest sentences. So we'll translate them in the next video. But I think that after these 3 videos, you might be able to do it by yourself now. And for people who are already quite comfortable, try to forget your translation and then try to redo the second slide without analyzing the sentences. It might be a good training. So, well, see you next video.